Hey guys, welcome to episode 110 of Axioms on Trial. Unfortunately, Mike couldn't make it. He had some technical issues. I think he's getting storms down where he is. I think he needs your laptop. I don't know what's been going on, but so I'm a little bit on my own at the moment. It's going to be like an editing stream where we watch you compile the clips. No, so we had planned on going over a specific video, but I'm gonna wait until he can join me to go over that video. Instead, I'm gonna go over a few random things that I found up here. Oh, good, I'm clear and audible. Thank you. Hey, Don, good to see you. I hope you're doing well. So yeah, this is gonna be sort of like I'm just kind of winging it at the moment. I felt bad just canceling the whole thing altogether. So it's just going to be sort of me rambling. And Bones, I'm glad you like the music. I like it too a lot, for sure. I'm also going to be, I was going to say, Guido, I'm thinking of uploading the video with Aiden as an episode, but I couldn't figure out how to do that yet. I think I need to like download it from TikTok and upload it on here. I didn't have time because this all happened kind of last minute. I didn't have time to get that figured out. But what I can do is play a few clips here that I was looking at and see if this works. Give me 1 second. Share screen. Tab. Let's see if this works. Okay. Tell me if you guys can hear this okay.
To me, do I believe in God?
Can you guys hear that? Here, I'll play it a little longer. I don't know if you guys can hear it okay.
And I don't like that question. And people have complained at me a lot, and I'm sure they have their reasons because they don't like my answers.
Okay, good. I'll just start out by saying that I am not a fan of Peterson. For every one thing that he says that makes sense, he says 10 other things that don't make any sense. He's on record criticizing postmodernism as a kind of a bankrupt ideology, and I agree with him. But then he turns into a complete postmodernist, the second that the question of God comes up, then all of a sudden, no words mean anything, and it's exhausting. I find his anti-trans perspective to be incredibly repulsive. So let's see what it says about God here.
And I have two answers. They've kind of become stock, which is not a good thing. But they're the best approximate. I can't figure out why I don't like the question exactly. I've got three. I had three sort of burgeoning hypotheses. One was it's none of your business. That's the first one. So it's like a privacy issue. Like it seemed to me to be a question that was too private to be answered properly.
That right there is incredibly strange to me. Like a public figure who at least attempts to engage in psychology and philosophy would all of a sudden feel uncomfortable addressing such an incredibly important question like that. There's there's some strange it seems to me that he's a deeply unhappy person, and this idea of God is something that he's clinging to, and if he feels like it's under attack, it's like he starts to spiral. And again, I don't know him, but that is just what I seem to be observing from the way in which he engaged in these conversations. Um, so.
And you could consider that a cop out, and maybe it is. And then another one was, well, what do you mean by believe? Like, do you mean the words? Do you mean to say the words, I believe in God?
Like, this is what I mean, right? Like, all of a sudden, all these words become completely ambiguous. Like, what do you mean by believe? Well, what I mean is you hold the proposition to be true, that you think that this is the state of affairs. It's not that complicated.
Does that indicate that you believe in God? Like, I don't know what you mean by believe exactly, and that's got me in trouble too, because people think that attempting to clarify the meaning of words is an attempt to escape from the question, when it's actually an attempt to specify the question. I mean, is what you believe what you say, or what you act out?
I don't think it specifies the question at all. I think he's muddying the waters for no reason.
Now, I would say to some degree it's both, but if push comes to shove, as far as I'm concerned, what you believe is what you act out, not what you say. And then, and if you're an integrated person, then what you act out and what you say are the same thing. And then you're a person whose word can be trusted, right? Because
so again, why is he doing this? Like, just you can believe in something and then maybe be hypocritical and not put it into action, right? But we're not asking, do you put the ideology into action? We're asking, do you believe in the proposition? This is unnecessary banter. Like, just answer the question.
What you say and what you do are isomorphic. They're the same thing. But belief is instantiated in action. So
not necessarily. I mean, you could argue that it should be, perhaps, but it's not necessarily the case.
I have also suggested that I act as if I believe in God, or to the best of my ability, and people aren't very happy with that either. And then the third is that I'm afraid that he might exist, which I think is the most comical of the three answers and perhaps the most accurate one. But then I was thinking about this today.
Which is another weird thing to say. Like, what you believe, as far as what you think the state of affairs is, should not be coming from a place of what you feel, simply what you feel. I guess we all have our intuitions, right? But the whole point of engaging in rigorous intellectual discourse is we try to eliminate those biases. So if you just believe something because either you're afraid of the alternative, or you're afraid that it's true, or you want it to be true, like, that's not how you justify what you believe in.
When I was thinking about what I might talk to you guys about, and I thought, well, let's go into this a little bit more. Let's say you do believe in God. Say, I believe in God. It's like, okay, well, that's hypothetically pretty impressive, I would say. It's like you believe that there's a divine power that oversees everything, that is fundamentally ethical, that
Why would that be impressive? There's no just good justification for it. What is impressive about it?
is watching everything you do, and you believe that. And so, what effect does that have on your behavior if you believe it? Does that mean that you're, well, are you all in on your beliefs? Are you sacrificing everything to this transcendent entity that you proclaim belief in? Have you cleansed yourself of all your sin, let's say? Are you making all the sacrifices that you need to make? Like, have you taken the mote out of your eye? No.
The fact that he thinks he needs to go through all of this to just answer whether or not he believes in God to whatever degree just sounds like a nervous breakdown. Like, this is not completely crazy to me.
Or are you in the same situation, let's say, that the Catholic Church seems to be in right now? Just out of curiosity, it's a good time to bring that up, since the Pope seems to be concerned with what's been happening with the Catholic Church, given the endless pedophilic scandals, let's say, which seem rather serious in my estimation, and might have been something that was cleaned up perhaps 100 or 1,000 years ago.
100 or 1,000 years ago. Like, I have conflicting feelings about this guy, because on one hand, like, for example, when he talks about trans issues, I find him to be a really awful person. On the other hand, there's like a part of me that feels almost empathetic to him, because I don't think that he's like okay emotionally. He seems to be, I think he wants so badly to be deep, to be respected, to be viewed as an intellectual, and I think he's so, at least the way he comes across to me, he comes across as such an unhappy, unfulfilled person. Don, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I've loved that. So far, what I've heard back from him is that he's not interested, or at least this was a while back, because like I'm too small of a creator or whatever. And I can understand that, but at the same time, it's kind of frustrating. I'm hoping that we can get something figured out, because he's one of those people that I've been wanting to engage with for quite a while. Yeah, money talks. I get that. But yeah, we'll see. Hey, Kat, how you doing? Good to see you. I'm gonna keep playing.
And it's being taken seriously, perhaps now and perhaps not, because it's not so easy to determine exactly what it would mean to take that seriously. And you might say, well, are all the people who are committing these heinous actions and then covering them up, if you ask them, well, do you believe in God? What are they going to say? Well, you'd think the answer would be yes, given that they're like priests. And yet, well, the evidence isn't exactly so clear that the mere statement, let's say, or the mere acting out of the ritual, let's say, and I'm not trying to denigrate the statement or the ritual, but I'm pointing out that that's no indication of your right to say that you believe.
Okay, so like, why is he talking about what priests believe when the question is directed at him? Again, if you want to define belief by not just following some rituals, but living your life on a daily basis, as though that is the way that you view things, and they shouldn't be like, that's not that complicated. Like, I don't get the need for this.
Because you got it, and I think this is why it's bothered me to answer this question. It's like, well, what right do I have to say that? to make that claim. I believe in God. Well, what's the claim? Is that the claim that I'm a good person somehow? Because you'd think that if you believed in God, actually, like seriously, that you'd be a good person, like right now. Because, well,
Okay, this is more obfuscating the whole thing. Like, all you could mean by belief in God is, do you believe in a deity that created everything, that's provided rules for us to live by? Whether or not you fail or succeed to live by those rules and therefore are a good or a bad person is independent of whether or not you believe in the claim that this being exists. So,
well, for obvious reasons, I would think. And so if that hasn't happened in some sort of miraculous sense, so that you're the best person you could possibly imagine being on an ongoing basis, and then terrified of deviating from that path in a serious manner, then I don't see why you have the right to say that you believe in God. You know, one of the things Nietzsche said about Christianity, he was a great critic of Christianity, although also a great friend in a very peculiar way, in that sometimes your best friend is the one who points out your weakest properties, let's say. He said, as far as he was concerned, there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross. And that's a, you know, perhaps an extreme statement, but one worth giving some consideration to. It's like, well, then you look at what are you called upon? Let's say if you're going to proclaim yourself as a believer, you know.
yeah, exactly.
And I thought about this a lot as I've gone through the Old Testament. I did a bunch of lectures last year, and so what are you called upon? Well, you're called upon initially to act out the spark of divinity that's within you by confronting potential with the logos that's within you, which means to take the opportunities that are in front of you, the potential future, and to transform it into the present in the best possible way, using truth and courage and careful articulation as your guide. So that's the first thing you're called on to do. That's a major deal there. That's a tough one. And then the second is to make the proper sacrifices. That's the Cain and Abel story. Is like you want something, you genuinely want it, you want to set the world straight, then you let go of what's necessary and you pursue. You let go of what isn't necessary, no matter what it is, no matter what it is. And then you pursue what's necessary. And then maybe you sacrifice your children to God. That was the story. That's one of the next stories that comes up, of course, and you think, well, that's pretty damn barbaric, and the way the story's laid out, of course it is, but that isn't exactly what it means. It means that what you try to do when you raise children is...
I mean, are any of you following this? Because I'm literally, my brain is starting to like fade. Like he's not saying anything.
That you try to do everything you can to impress upon them by imitation and by instruction and by love and by encouragement that they are crucial beings in the world whose ethical decisions play an important role in shaping the structure of reality itself, and that they have the moral responsibility to do that. And you get your ark in order, that's your family, let's say, so that when the storms come, you can stay above water for the 40 days of flooding, and you're capable of leading your people through the desert when the desert makes itself manifest, and you can escape from tyranny properly because you're wise.
Okay, do you think I should move to a next clip? Because this is ridiculous.
Enough to see it, and you take the full burden of being on yourself, all the suffering that's part and parcel of that. You accept that voluntarily, let's say, and you do everything you can to confront the malevolence that's part of you and that's part of the state and that's part of the world. And you make a garden around you. That's the paradise, a walled garden. It's a walled, well-watered place, so the forces of nature and society exist together in harmony, and you place your family in that so that they can live properly. And you treat your enemy as if he's yourself, and the same with your brother. And, well, then you can say, then maybe you can say, maybe then you have the right to say that you believe in God. Otherwise, maybe you should think twice about it, because You know, there's a line in the New Testament that Christ himself says. Two of them, I should read them too, because they're very relevant to this. I guess I could paraphrase them. A rich man comes up to Christ and says, good leader, good Lord. And he asks him a question about how it is that he should be a good person. And Christ says, don't call me good. There's no one that's good but God. And, you know, that's worth thinking about. I mean,
he really does pronounce God in a really weird way.
The one person that in principle, in our ancient stories, had the right to make some direct connection between himself and the divine was unwilling to do it when challenged. And so it might be reasonable to assume that each of us could be much more cautious about making that sort of statement bluntly when we're asked. And then the other line is, not all those who say, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Got that about right? Which means something approximating, just because you make a claim to moral virtue, let's say, your belief in God, which I can't see how you can make a higher claim to moral virtue than that. You know, I mean...
Like, why is he conflating belief in God with anything about moral virtue?
Gnostic, atheistic, I don't really care. The point is something like this. Imagine something of ultimate transcendent value. I don't care whether you believe in it or not, but imagine that something like that exists. And then you swear allegiance to it, which is to say, I believe in this. I mean, there's a heavy moral burden that comes along with that, just to allow yourself to utter the words without feeling that you should be immediately struck down appropriately by lightning. And so I think that's why that question makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, that's ridiculous. That was absurd. Oh, 1 second. Okay, so here's how he should have answered that. Instead of going on a rant about actions and ethical virtues and all of that, answer the question. Do you believe that there's a being who created everything that is the highest moral order to strive for? That's it. I don't think he actually believes. I think he wants to believe. I think he's desperate to believe. And I think he can't get himself to fully convince himself. And I think that hurts him. Yeah, exactly. Belief is not alliance or allegiance. Yeah, I think Peterson is just an expert evading the question. Here, I'm going to play another ridiculous video real quick. 1 second. Okay.
What do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God. And I think, no, if we're going to get down to the fundamental brass tacks, we don't really know what any of those things mean. And so for me, belief, for example.
How can he say that he's not a postmodernist and then say that we have no real way of knowing what we mean by believe or by God or by any of this? Like, that's absurd.
Is often reflected not so much in proposition as it is in action. If I want to know what you believe, I could ask you, and hopefully you have some idea about what you believe, but I'd rather see what you do.
Well, can I push back a little bit with this? Because, like, for example, when I was reading your book, your newest book, actually this time, 12 More Rules. They're very good books, by the way. I mean, I recommend
Thank
them,
you, sir.
honestly. So one thing you mentioned in the book, you were talking about some psychological theory, which I don't forget. I forget what it is right now. But you mentioned something. You said there's, the problem with this such and such theory is that it doesn't have any evidence. Full stop. Categorical. All this, what you're doing now, you didn't mention that. You didn't say, well, it depends on what you mean by this. It depends on what you... Sorry.
By the way, the Muslim he's talking to is a complete piece of shit. He just homophobic, sexist, like apologist for awful things found in Islam, and then another one of these Muslims who's incredibly condescending, and strawmans atheists with an ease that's almost impressive. So, yeah, just wanted to throw that out there because I've seen some of his videos and some of the people that his crew of Muslims, and I find them to be repulsive.
Sorry to say, yeah, but it depends on what you mean by this. It depends on what you mean. You become postmodern all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you become now.
Yeah, well, that's that's a definite. That's a definite.
Yeah.
Look, I think that's partly why the postmodern critique, in some sense, was inevitable, is because we started to dig down into something like, say, the meaning of stories, because that's really where the postmodernists got their impetus, because the postmodern literary theorists, sorry to drag this up, but it's relevant, they hit a mystery, which was, well, if you read a given text, story, or even a paragraph, and you get 100 people to offer their opinion on it, in some way you get 100 different opinions. And you can tell that if you assign students to write an essay, let's say. And so then a problem emerges is that, well, if there's 100 different opinions, and some of them even appear to oppose one another, how do you know what the true significance is of the text?
So I'm writing my thesis on postmodernism, okay? And there is a difference between recognizing that language is ambiguous and that certainly literature is up to interpretation, and doubting the idea that we're communicating on any level, that these words like beliefs have no grounding for us to know what we're talking about. By the way, I don't think it's actually true that you can get from one paragraph 100 different interpretations. It's really not the case. There are far more similarities than that, and languages, I don't think it's that open to interpretation. I think what the postmodernists were right about is in expressing doubt on the meta-narratives, especially of history, of recognizing that more often than not, history isn't a depiction of truth as much as, the agenda of those that are in power. But then, like most movements, it became a caricature of itself, where now we moved away from just, okay, let's not be naive about what science can produce and recognize the limitations of science, and let's not be naive about what is really going on in the historical narratives and the social narratives that we experience. And then it became a whole other thing where now there's no such thing as truth, which is a self-defeating statement, that we can't even know that we're communicating in any real way, that there's no grounding of any kind for language. It became a ridiculous caricature of where it started off as, which was, I think, actually a positive thing, a positive skepticism.
And then worse, how do you even know that there is a true significance? And then you think, okay, well, that's a major problem. And then here's a worse problem.
Yeah, exactly. We can also just define, okay, what do we mean? What do I mean by this term? What do you mean by that term? To make sure that we're actually having the same, more or less the same concept. If language was completely relative to that degree, we couldn't function in the world. If there was no sort of capacity to narrow down what we're saying and to understand each other, we will be lost. Society couldn't function. I don't think it's by chance that things happen to, and yes, sometimes there are miscommunications, of course, but we can come to understand those miscommunications and resolve them.
Imagine you have an assemblage of texts, like the biblical corpus, let's say, which is really a library, and it's in some sense canonical, right? Well, if you can't decide on the fixed meaning of even a given paragraph, how in the world can you make the statement that this selection of texts, which are much more complicated than just paragraphs, is somehow canonical? Now, the answer to that is, this is the answer. We don't know. Now, the problem with the postmodernists wasn't that they figured out that this was a mystery, because not only is this the mystery of textual interpretation, which is a major mystery, how do we understand a text, but it's also the mystery of perception, because at the same time, people who are investigating perception, Jonathan has been talking about this with John Vervaeke, a cognitive scientist, at the same time, scientists on the perceptual front in AI labs and neuroscientists were discovering that it's so complicated to look at the world, which is to interpret the world, let's say, that it isn't obvious that it's even possible, which is partly why we don't have autonomous robots. They can't.
But that's absurd. Like, yes, there are issues with, well, I don't know what he's even saying with that, actually. Like, yeah, I don't think anybody's claiming that we have a perfect perception of the way things are. No, we have a processed perception that is very likely not the way that reality fundamentally is. But there's a shared nature in our perception, which the whole point of phenomenology is to examine how we can talk about subjective experience in objective terms. So it's not going to be the case that it's all going to be so wildly different that we have no way of grounding anything. Why, if he actually believed this, why is he having the conversation? How would we know any of the words that were coming out of his mouth if he actually took what he's saying to the the extreme?
Can't see the world. Now, it's easy for us because we just look at it, but that's not so easy. And so, so what's the point of all this? Yeah. Well, the point of all this is that if you delve into questions deeply enough, you do run into the problem of perception and the multitude and multiplicity of perception. And that's a real problem. And so when I do something like I interrogate a question, well, the postmodern problem does emerge. Now, I've been trying to work out solutions to that, and Jonathan and I and John Vervaeke have been discussing this a lot. The postmodernists were correct, I think, in their diagnosis of the problem. They leapt right to the idea that the way we solve the problem of perception is by exercising power. They just took a Marxist story and said, well, there's the solution.
When you say they, who are you talking about?
Well, that's not true. What is he talking about? That's not at all what the postmodernist... What? That's not what the postmodernist answer to the problem was. The entire thing was to be wary of power dynamics, to expose power dynamics, to recognize the reality of power dynamics and how they influence these narratives, which then people assume to be true. What is he talking about?
Mostly the French intellectual types like Derrida and Foucault. And
I would disagree with this, by the way. I don't think Derrida or Foucault took a Marxist position at all.
Didn't.
Well, Jonathan, you want to have at that for a bit?
But that's not my fight. It's a worthless victory for me.
Are you sure you want to talk about that?
No. I don't think, I don't care.
Okay, well, we can either delve into that or not.
Yeah.
Let me just say something on Jordan about what you were saying. That is, I think that when there's this question of do you believe in God, I think one of the problems that the difficulty that Jordan faced with a modern Protestantism, which was very propositional. And it was like, I believe, and it's just a bunch of things that you believe in terms of thinking. And I do think that what Jordan is trying to grasp at and trying to understand is actually probably closer to something that most traditional Muslims would believe, which is that if you say that you submit to God, but you don't submit to God, then that word is empty.
That I agree with.
Yes.
And the question is, why is it empty, right? If you said the words, why is it still empty?
And so I think that what he's grasping
That's
at is to
hypocrisy.
find a more encompassing, it's like, stop asking me if I believe in God, watch me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So that was something. Oops. Let's see. Play one more. Oops, sorry. 1 second. Okay. So how do I don't know who he is. I don't know who he is. I'm gonna try to share the screen for this other clip here. Sorry, just one moment.
As much as I believe in God, I truly do, I have never found that arguments for God's existence are nearly as effective or as important as arguments for God's necessity.
Mhm.
And that's the point that I want to make here, and we're all making here. No God, chaos. You don't believe in God, at least understand what the consequences of that non-belief are.
Completely delusional. They didn't know God equals chaos. No, that's your fear mongering because you can't think critically. The idea that without God, everything falls apart and there's no grounding for morality, or there's no grounding for a stable society. That is dogmatism and delusion of the worst kind. What these people are telling us, even though they're not saying it outright, is that they think without a dictator, a celestial dictator, as Hitchens phrased it, there is no reason to be kind to one another, or there's nothing that can ground empathy. It's absurd. It's just.
What's interesting about that is we keep having these and the more that I've been thinking about this in relation to my, forays into the political or cultural world, this is another consequence of how you align the moral with the strategic. And in some ways, what you're saying is if you make a moral argument, people don't even know why they think what they think. So to come in and say to them, you need to change your moral outlook, right? What you're suggesting is, and why I think that's more fruitful, is it's a strategic approach. And that's a way to lead people in, and then they can decide how high up that hierarchy of understanding they want to move.
Well, you can look at this purely psychologically, which I like to do as much as possible, because I don't think you should bring God into the issue unless you have to, in some sense. You either are aiming for something unified, which means something at the pinnacle and something that's the highest and superordinate and most valuable, or you're not, in which case perhaps you're aiming down, or you're aiming at a multiplicity of diverse things which are conflictual. Those are your options. And we know that if your perception is fragmented and if your navigation is fragmented, which is a chaotic state, the consequence of that is anxiety and despair, because that's actually what anxiety and despair mark.
And this is also delusional, because so much anxiety and trauma, psychologically speaking, is due to religion. It's due to the fear that religion instills in people. So this idea that without believing in this bullshit, that we would fall into anxiety and despair. I think they're projecting this because this is their weak-mindedness. Someone like Peterson, I think, needs this idea and belief to keep him going. But I certainly don't need that even remotely.
Is that you're confident and secure when you've reduced your plethora of potential pathways forward to one path. You know that if you're in a vehicle, it's like, well, are you going one place or 10? If you're going 10, you can't go anywhere and you're confused. You have to be going one place. And then everything snaps together, and then your nervous system is literally regulated. Anxiety is the response to chaos, the a priori response to chaos.
Can I ask Dennis a question?
There are people who are capable of embracing the idea that reality is chaotic, and to some degree, and it is in the acceptance of one's situation that anxiety is reduced, not in the desperate attempt to control things. Like,
Question in light of that. So, Dennis, you said earlier that you need the necessity of God is the necessity of belief in God is what's going to restore us, what's going to keep civilization on the right track. But is it enough to have a kind of psychological, just a psychological sort of stability, a belief that God might exist, or that you should conduct yourself as if God is real, God exists, just as a kind of something that provides you with a kind of psychological unity and stability and order? Or do you think that it's
the idea that you would need to believe in things without sufficient evidence for any of that to be moral, or to navigate your anxiety, or to handle your life, is just, I think it's sick. I think it's a sick way of looking at things.
Do you think that a culture needs more than that? Is a kind of cultural religion, cultural Judaism, cultural Christianity enough?
Well, mine's not cultural, as nice as cultural is.
But you seem to leave open that possibility.
Yes, I wrestle with that, and I've come to the conclusion that I offered earlier. The number of people who believe in God and that God is meaningless is enormous. For most moderns, God is a celestial butler. This God, here is my list of what I'd like you to do for me. Have a great day. I am uninterested. I know this is almost heretical for many of my religious friends. I have asked God in my whole life twice for something. Once that my mother not punish me for breaking the vase in the house, and then once as an adult. By the way, in both instances, they were answered. It's a little eerie for me, who doesn't ask him for anything. But in all seriousness, I am infinitely more interested in what God wants from me than what I want from God. And that's the way I portray it to people. And they're moved by that because they know God is not a celestial butler. The number of people who prayed for their dying child and the child died, everybody knows that that's the case. So I'm tired of people who say they believe in God, but it doesn't amount to anything. Why?
I'm tired of people like him who completely strawman atheists and have no understanding of philosophy, and they think that there's some kind of authority on these issues. Like, none of these people are an authority on morality. None of these people are an authority on how to derive meaning from one's life. If you people are too weak to find those things on your own, you need your ancient traditions and fairy tales, frankly, to do that. Go right ahead, but don't talk at us from a place of superiority.
Why is God important? Changes minds. The founders of America, which I think is the greatest country ever founded, and it may fall over. We're at a crisis point. They knew the importance. They were not all doctrinaire Christians. They were all, by the way, cultural Christians, clearly.
No, that's not true either.
But they were all very God-centered.
This is false. This is a lie. There were some were theists, few were theists, some were deists, and some didn't even believe at all. The separation of church and state, which someone like him is constantly trying to undermine, was one of the core ideas that they were striving for. They were trying to move away from religious oppression.
When Benjamin Franklin is considered a deist, if deist means Aristotle's unmoved mover, none of the founders were deists. They believed in a God who acted in history. Jefferson, this is almost unknown to Americans. Jefferson and Franklin designed a Great Seal of the United States. You'll find this fascinating. You know what it is? The Jews leaving Egypt. It was not, tragically, it was not adopted. Two of the least Orthodox Christians, small o, wanted a biblical depiction to depict America. The Hebrews left Egypt, we left Europe. So they knew the importance of God, and a lot of believers don't.
Another aspect of the
Yeah, so again, why does just because some other people believed in the same thing mean anything?
American Revolution. You probably know that at the defeat of Yorktown, the Hessian and British troops were ordered to play the ballad, "The World Turned Upside Down," which was a 17th century ballad and came out of the English Revolution, which came out of the Torah. And the simple idea was, it became various crazy things with the diggers and the levelers and so on. God had created order. Humans had created disorder. So God, to create order again, turned the world the right way up and turned it upside down. And you have in Acts 17, these men who've turned the world upside down have come here, and so on. And the original idea of revolution was actually biblical. Although today it's almost totally taken over by the...
What's amazing is that these people don't recognize the table of trouble. That they hold to views and definitions of God which are self-contradictory. How could an imperfect creation come from a perfect creator? It doesn't make any sense. Whatever took place in reality, if this God exists as they defined it, would have been by definition in the plan of a perfect, all-knowing being. He couldn't have been surprised that he would have set up the circumstances for the disorder and for evil to arise. So it really doesn't make any sense.
The left, reordering the world and putting it the right way up. Or again, you should say repairing the earth.
Yes, repairing the world under the rule of God. Yeah.
So we could say that you could ask the question not so much what do you have with God, you could reverse it in the Nietzschean sense. You could say what do you have without God? And then what you definitely have is you have no centralizing axis, you have no highest spirit in the highest place.
That's not what Nietzsche's saying.
And so psychologically, that means chaos and confusion and internal conflict. And then you have no common spirit that unites you. And so then you have conflict. And so I would say that acting as if is the crucial issue. And
the idea that without God or religion, that you have conflict, when it's the religion that is one of the foundations for conflict and for the humanization of other people. These people are detached from reality. You don't just get conflict if you remove unjustified beliefs.
I was going over that this morning in a class I was doing on the Sermon on the Mount, and Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount, the ordering of his ethical injunction is something like do and then teach. But it's in that order. But it's not do only, and it's not teach only. It's do and then teach. And so you could say you have this internal mimicry of the Father, the Holy Spirit, let's say, the revolutionary spirit in the proper sense. And then you can communicate descriptions of that spirit. And that's the religious enterprise. And we confuse that, I would say, in some sense, with descriptions of external reality. They're not the same thing. The religious enterprise is the description of the animating spirit and the proper animating spirit. And that's why even in the Exodus story, God is presented as the spirit that calls the hero to lead his people out of slavery. It's not a description of the world. It isn't that the idea that there's wisdom in the world isn't there, but that's not the superordinate idea. And so I think you need both. You have to have the acting as if. That's the primary thing, because otherwise you're a hypocrite.
The most famous philosopher of the as if is Immanuel Kant of the 18th century. I mean, just the great kind of father of the Enlightenment. And he's often thought to be somebody who does away with God. He's a kind of precursor to Nietzsche in lots of ways. There was a poet called Heine who said that Kant was much more devastating than Robespierre, because whereas Robespierre just decapitated a king, Kant decapitated God. But I think he had this idea that we can't know that God exists. We can't have theoretical knowledge that God exists, but we must so conduct ourselves in the ethical life as if God exists.
Yeah, except that we don't get our ethical notions from religion. You know, if we read the Bible and we get rid of, you know, we ignore the verses that provide rules for slavery, and we embrace ideas like the Golden Rule, that's not coming from the book. That's not coming from the tradition. That is coming from our understanding and our moral intuitions and our observations about what will lead us to well-being. Yeah, exactly. So Lynn writes, the African word Ubuntu, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is a perfect expression of morality without God. I am because we are. So simple. Yeah, it's like these people can't seem to understand that without God, none of the things they seem to care about become lost. You can retain meaning, you can retain morality, you can retain peace. The people that can't is because they don't have a good foundation to their own existence, to their own personality. They haven't accepted their condition of in the circumstances of reality. They're desperate to control it. So,
because as free beings, that's the primacy of pure practical reason. So we know its reality as free agents. So you could say in a way that Kant is not actually claiming that, I mean, I think Heine's completely wrong about this, but that it's, you know, God is just a regulative as if, as of, but rather he is criticizing a notion that, a sort of Aristotelian, Platonic notion, that you know, we can know God by contemplating some abstract object. And he's saying, no, we have contact. We have contact with noumenal reality. Right. We have contact with the divine as free agents. So when we
that's absurd. That just claims
obey the categorical imperative, which he thinks is intrinsically linked to the idea of God, that's the kind of knowledge.
We saw that echoed with Moses. I mean, Moses walks by the burning bush, but as we all noted, he does turn to notice. And so I would say we do have access to experience of God if we pay enough attention.
Yeah, again, they have no grounds to show that these so-called experiences of God isn't purely psychological. There's nothing about recognizing moral values. Like if they're just calling it interaction with the divine or experience of God. This is just playing with words. No, I can be an atheist physicalist and retain all of those things and recognize all those things for what they actually are, as opposed to pretending like it's some access to some immaterial order. So, but yeah, I'm about to hit the 1 hour mark, so I think I'll leave this here. This was just sort of a kind of winging it little episode here, just to go over a few clips. It's always kind of amazing to me how much time is wasted by these people who think that they're doing intellectual work while they're really just playing with stories and acting as though these stories are real. It's kind of mind-boggling to me. But yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. As always, I appreciate you guys coming in and engaging in the chat, and yeah, I think should have more content out the coming week. I think I'm going to try to post one conversation that was had on TikTok, where my brother was speaking with a theist. That was a pretty crazy conversation. And yeah, so I hope that everybody has a good night. And thank you for joining me. And I'll talk to you guys again soon.